The morning they buried my wife, I kept thinking about the key. It was a small brass key, old-fashioned, the kind you'd find in an antique shop. The lawyer, a quiet man named Gerald Hoffman, had pressed it into my palm at the end of the reading and said in a low voice, "Robert, there's one more thing Margaret wanted you to have." Then he slid a sealed envelope across the table and added, "She asked that you open this alone." I stood at the cemetery in my best dark suit, holding that key in my coat pocket, turning it over and over between my fingers while the pastor spoke about grace and eternal rest. My two daughters stood on either side of me, my older daughter, Caroline, rigid and composed the way she always was, and my younger daughter, Diane, crying softly into a tissue. My son-in-law, Diane's husband, stood slightly apart from everyone else with his arms crossed. Even at a funeral, he looked like a man calculating numbers. I had been married to Margaret for 31 years. I thought I knew everything about her. I was wrong. We met in the fall of 1991 at a hardware store in Columbus, Ohio. She was trying to reach a box of tile grout on the top shelf, and I offered to get it for her. She laughed and said she didn't need rescuing, then asked me to get it anyway. That was Margaret, independent to the bone, warm underneath it all. We married 14 months later in a small ceremony at her mother's church. I was an electrical engineer. She taught elementary school for 20 years, then retired early when her knees started giving her trouble. We had a quiet life, a good life. I thought. The envelope sat on my nightstand for 3 days after the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Every time I walked past it, my chest tightened. Margaret had been sick for 8 months, pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't negotiate. She had time to prepare, time to say what she needed to say. Or so I believed. But the key and the sealed letter told me something had been left unsaid. On the 4th morning, I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table where we had eaten breakfast together for 3 decades, and I opened the envelope. Her handwriting was unsteady. She had written this near the end, when her hands shook, but I recognized every loop and curve of it. "Robert, I need you to know that everything I did out of love, not to deceive you. Please believe that first, before you believe anything else. In the back of my blue file cabinet, behind the insurance folders, there is a second envelope. Inside it, you will find the deed to a property I have owned for 11 years, a small house and a piece of land in Morrow County, about 2 hours from Columbus. I never told you about it. I know that was wrong. I am sorry. But I could not explain it without explaining everything, and I was not ready. I hope this letter will help you understand. The key is for the front door. Please go there before you make any decisions about what to do with it. I love you more than I ever knew how to say. Your Margaret." I read the letter 4 times. Then I sat in the kitchen for a very long time, looking at the yellow curtains she had picked out the spring before she got sick. 11 years. She had owned a property for 11 years and never mentioned it once. I went to the blue file cabinet, behind the insurance folders, exactly where she said. I found the second envelope. Inside was a deed, just as she described 12 acres in Morrow County, a county I had driven through maybe twice in my life. The property had been purchased in her name only in 2013 for $84,000. I had no memory of that money leaving our accounts. We kept separate checking accounts for personal spending. It was something we had agreed on early in our marriage. A small piece of independence for each of us. I realized then that she had used hers. I also found a photograph. It showed a modest white house with a green front door, a porch with 2 rocking chairs, and a large oak tree in the front yard. The photograph was old, slightly faded, the edges soft. On the back, in different handwriting, "Not Margaret," someone had written, "Home." I did not sleep well that night. I told myself I would drive out the following weekend. I told myself I was not afraid of what I might find. But the truth was I sat with that photograph for 2 days, studying the handwriting on the back, wondering who had written that single word, wondering what my wife had been carrying alone for 11 years while she slept beside me every night and made coffee every morning and helped me pick out new gutters for the house and drove with me to our granddaughter's school plays. My daughter, Caroline, called on a Thursday. She had heard from Gerald Hoffman. Margaret's lawyer had apparently reached out to both daughters to let them know about the property, as he was required to do during the estate process. Caroline did not ease into the subject. Dad, what is this property in Morrow County? Why didn't we know about this? Why didn't you know about this? I told her I was still looking into it. Gerald said it might be worth considerably more than what Mom paid for it. The land values up there have gone up significantly. He mentioned something about a portion of the acreage possibly having mineral rights attached. I told her I hadn't reviewed any of that yet. Well, we need to review it. Diane and I are part of this family too. Whatever Mom left should be, Caroline. My voice was quiet, but she stopped. Your mother left me a letter asking me to visit the property before any decisions are made. That is what I am going to do first. I will call you after. There was a pause. Fine, she said, in the tone she used when things were not fine. I drove out to Morrow County on a Saturday morning in early March. The fields were bare and gray-brown. The trees still bare from winter. The sky low and white. I followed the GPS down a county road and then onto a gravel lane. And after about a quarter mile I saw it, the white house from the photograph. The green front door. The oak tree. Still bare-limbed, but unmistakably the same tree. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out. The property was quiet. A neighboring farm was visible in the distance. There was a small barn behind the house, older than the house itself. Its red paint faded to a dusty rose. The grass was winter dead, but the yard was neat. Someone had been maintaining it. I noticed that immediately. The flower beds along the porch were mulched. The gutters were clear. I walked to the front door and used the brass key. The house was warm. Not stuffy warm. As if it had been heated recently. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something else I couldn't place. Something that reminded me of the way Margaret's classroom used to smell when I picked her up after school. Pencils and paper and something quietly industrious. Inside, the front room was simple. A couch. Un roux. A small television. Bookshelves lined one wall. Filled. Genuinely filled. Not for decoration. Children's books. Paperback novels. A row of encyclopedias that looked well used. On a low table near the window, a jigsaw puzzle. Half finished. The completed portion showing a red barn in a green field. I stood in the middle of that room for a long time. In the kitchen I found a note on the table. Handwritten on lined paper. The penmanship, careful and deliberate. Mr. Callahan, I heard you might be coming. I wasn't sure if I should be here or give you space. I decided to give you space. If you want to talk, I live in the blue house at the end of Fitch Road, about a mile north. My name is Donna. I was your wife's friend. She helped me and my grandson more than I can say. I hope when you see everything, you'll understand. Donna Marsh. There was a door off the kitchen that opened onto a short hallway. At the end of the hallway were 2 bedrooms. The first was clearly a child's room, a single bed with a blue quilt. A small desk. A shelf of model cars. On the desk was a framed photograph, a boy, maybe 10 or 11, grinning at the camera, missing one front tooth. Next to the photograph was a hand-drawn card. I picked it up. On the front, in a child's block, letters 4 MRS. M. Inside. Thank you for my room and my books and for always coming on Tuesdays. You are my best grown-up. Marcus, I had to put the card down. I pressed my hand flat on the desk and stood there until my breathing steadied. The second bedroom had clearly been Margaret's when she stayed here. Her blue cardigan was folded on the chair by the window. A pair of her reading glasses sat on the nightstand. A book was open, face down, the way she always left books she intended to come back to. A small framed photograph of the two of us, our anniversary trip to Savannah. Years ago. Her laughing at something I'd said sat on the dresser. She had kept a photo of us here. I drove to the blue house at the end of Fitch Road. Donna Marsh was a woman in her late 60s, small and careful in her movements, with the look of someone who had worked hard her whole life and was not finished yet. She made coffee without asking whether I wanted any, and set it on the table between us. She had known Margaret for 12 years. She told me. They had met through a church outreach program in Columbus. Margaret had been a volunteer. Donna had come in looking for assistance after her daughter passed away suddenly, leaving behind a 7-year-old boy named Marcus. Your wife was the one who kept showing up, Donna said. Every week. Then twice a week. She helped me figure out the legal guardianship paperwork. She drove Marcus to his appointments. She read to him every Tuesday evening for 3 years. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. When I told her I was afraid we'd lose our rental, the landlord was selling the building, she said she would figure something out. What Margaret figured out was the property on Fitch Road. She used money she had saved over years from her teacher's pension. Money I hadn't thought to ask about because we were comfortable and I trusted her completely. And she purchased 12 acres and a house, and she quietly became the reason a boy named Marcus had a stable place to grow up. She never wanted anything for it, Donna said. I tried to pay her back. She wouldn't hear of it. She said Donna stopped. She looked at the window. She said she and her husband had never been able to have children of their own, that they had accepted that, but that it didn't mean she had to stop mothering. She said that mothering was a thing you could do for anyone who needed it. I had to look away. Margaret and I had tried to have children in our first years of marriage. It hadn't happened. We had grieved it quietly, together, and eventually made peace with it. Or I had made peace with it. I thought she had too. It had never occurred to me that she had found another way to carry that love. I drove back to Columbus that evening in the dark, and I thought about 31 years of marriage, and how a person can share a life with someone and still not see all the rooms in them. Caroline called that night. I didn't answer. I sat in the kitchen with Margaret's letter, and the photograph of Marcus, and I let myself feel everything I needed to feel before I had to deal with anything else. The following week, Gerald Hoffman informed me that the 12 acres included subsurface mineral rights and that a preliminary assessment suggested natural gas deposits beneath a portion of the land. The estimated value, if developed, was between $2 and $4 million. My son-in-law, Diane's husband, found out within 48 hours. He called me personally, which he almost never did. He was a commercial real estate developer, and he used that voice on me, the smooth, assured, slightly impatient voice he used when he believed he was the smartest person in a negotiation. Robert. This is actually a really fortunate situation. With the mineral rights alone, you're looking at a significant asset. I have contacts who could move quickly on this. I think the family should sit down and talk about the best way to what I asked, to maximize the value of the estate. My wife has been in the ground for 3 weeks. I said, call me again in 6 months. I hung up. Caroline was more measured about it. But the message was the same. She came to the house that Sunday, ostensibly to bring me a casserole and see how I was managing. Within 20 minutes, she was at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, asking about the deed, the mineral rights assessment, whether I had spoken to a property attorney yet. Dad, I understand this property had a sentimental purpose for Mom, but we have to be practical. This is a significant asset and it should be handled. Her name was Margaret. I said. Caroline looked up. Your mother. Not Mom, who had sentimental purposes. Margaret. She spent 12 years of her own money and her own time making sure a boy who lost his mother had somewhere safe to grow up. That is what this property is. I folded my hands on the table. I need you to understand that before we have any other conversation. Caroline was quiet for a moment, Then did you know about any of this? No. And, you're not angry? I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I said, the first few days, I was angry. I felt like she hadn't trusted me with it. But I've been thinking about why she kept it separate. I paused. I think she was protecting it. She knew I would have supported her. I hope she knew that. But she also knew that once something is shared, it becomes subject to other people's opinions, other people's needs. I looked at Caroline. She kept it separate so it would stay what she intended it to be. A month after my visit, I drove back out to the property. It was April now. The oak tree in full leaf. The fields around the property turned green. Donna met me on the porch and Marcus came out from behind her, 13 now, taller than his photograph. Still with that grin. He shook my hand very seriously, the way a boy does when he's been taught to make a good impression. I'm sorry about Mrs. M, he said. She was really cool. She really was. I agreed. Donna had asked me, carefully, what I planned to do with the property. I had already spoken with Gerald and with a trust attorney. Margaret's intent had been clear to me from the moment I read her letter. Clearer the longer I sat with it. I told Donna that I intended to place the property in a revocable trust, with specific provisions that it would remain available to her and Marcus as their primary residence, for as long as either of them needed it, with first right of purchase at assessed value if I decided to sell. I also told her that any proceeds from the mineral rights, if they were ever developed, would go into a separate educational trust in Marcus's name. Donna sat down on the porch step. She didn't say anything for a while. She told me you were a good man. She finally said, she said that more than once. My daughter Diane came around, eventually, in the way that Diane always came around quietly, without announcing it, showing up one evening with coffee and an apology for her husband's phone call. He gets ahead of himself, she said. He doesn't think about people first. She looked at me. Mom knew what she was doing. Didn't she? She always did. I said. Caroline took longer. I gave her the time. One evening she called and asked if she could come with me the next time I drove out to the property. We went on a Sunday in May. She walked through the house slowly, looking at the bookshelves, the child's desk, the half-finished jigsaw puzzle that Marcus had completed in the meantime. She stood for a while in the doorway of the bedroom where Margaret's cardigan still hung on the chair. She didn't say much on the drive home, but when I pulled into her driveway she turned to me and said, I wish I'd known this part of her. She would have told you eventually. I said, I believe that. Do you really? I think she wanted to be sure it was solid first. She wanted to be sure it would last before she let anyone else's voice into it. Caroline nodded slowly. I watched her turn that over. There's a version of this story where I sold the land and kept the money, and felt reasonable about it. Where I thanked Margaret for the surprise and moved on. Where my son-in-law made a commission and Caroline got a check and everything was tidy and efficient and over. But here is what I know after 63 years of living: the things that last are never the ones that were the most efficient. They're the ones that someone quietly, stubbornly refused to let go of. Margaret made a choice. Alone. Year after year. To show up for a child who needed showing up for. She could have done that once or twice and considered herself a generous person. She didn't. She made it a commitment. She built it into her life so completely that she needed a separate key for it. I keep that key now on my regular keychain, right next to my house key. I feel it every time I reach into my pocket. Marcus graduates middle school in June. I have been invited to the ceremony. I am going. I have been going out to the property most Sundays now. Donna has started keeping a pot of coffee on. The jigsaw puzzle on the low table has been replaced by a new one, a covered bridge in New England. Just started. The edge pieces barely sorted. Margaret always started with the edge pieces. I told Marcus that one afternoon. He thought about it and said, That makes sense. You need to know where the borders are before you can fill in the middle. He said it like it was obvious. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just slow to learn. I sat on the porch of a house my wife bought without telling me. Drank coffee with a woman my wife befriended without mentioning it. And watched a boy my wife loved, without explanation, kick a soccer ball around a yard. She never showed me. And I thought I did not know all the rooms in her. But the rooms I didn't know were full of good things. I think that is the best any of us can hope for.